market watcher Anthony Saccaro.
Anthony Saccaro here to help us is Anthony Saccaro, president of Providence Financial and Insurance Services.
Anthony, thank you so much for being with us.
Providence Financial's Anthony Saccaro is with us.
Anthony, what are you telling your clients who are in that position?
We're in the middle of a very long-term secular cycle. And if you're depending on that money, you're depending on the interest, you're depending on that, you're over 50 years old, you're going to need that in retirement, the rates will not move. They're going to stay down for a long time. I think Japan's a good example of that. 90% of my clients have no stock at all. If you can live off of your portfolio and a 3 or 4 or 5% interest rate and not lose money the next time the market crashes, then that's what you should do.
See your articles in the USA Today, Forbes, Wall Street Journal. I mean, you're everywhere, man.
Annual client appreciation event, and our first event fully online, and hopefully our last event online. Oh my gosh, what a year we've had, right? You know, if I'd have told you last November at the Odyssey, when we did our last client appreciation event, that in another 3 months, you would actually be wearing masks, not be able to eat at restaurants, air travel would have gone down by 95%, you would have thought I was nuts. But things have absolutely changed. And we've had a lot of good events, right? Some of you have been to the Odyssey with us multiple times. We have actually been to Porter Ranch Country Club. We did one event up at Mountain Gate Country Club. We've had magicians. We've had comedians. We had a country band one year where yours truly showed up as Garth Brooks. And I got to tell you, that singing that Garth Brooks song was probably the scariest thing I've ever done. Put me on Fox News, 100 million people, CNBC, Worldwide Exchange, fine, no problem. Throw questions at me on national TV that I don't know, no problem. But sing in front of my clients? No, that was a deal stretcher. That was a comfort stone stretcher for me. But the good news is I don't think I lost any clients. So I guess that's good. And we've got just a good hour for you. We're going to be an hour. And I've got a guest speaker that some of you are familiar with, some of you aren't. And we're going to let him talk with you and answer some questions. And I'm super excited about listening to what he has to say, and you should be as well too. And then what we're going to do is we're going to give away 5 iPad minis at every one of our client appreciation events, just because you're a client. The only reason we do these events is to thank you for being a client of ours, for trusting us with your retirement. And we don't take it lightly. And the reason I do these events is to thank you. And we love to give away prizes. So we're going to give away 5 iPad minis. But you've got to pay attention, because at the end, when our speaker is done, I'm going to let you know what you have to do to get entered. So you'll want to pay attention to that. And I do want to spend just a few minutes with you before our speaker starts. I want to give you just a quick couple of updates. Not to mention the year that we've had. It's just been an absolutely interesting year. It's been interesting in the world of economics. It's been interesting in the world of investments. It's affected how we do things. I'm recording this out of my home, working more days at my home now than I am at the office. We've got team members, which I'm going to introduce you to before I introduce you to our guest speaker, and they're working mostly at home. I have a 3,500 square foot office in Woodland Hills, and we've got one staff member there full time, and everyone kind of comes and goes. So it's just the world's changed in a dramatic way. And that's true with your investments. It's true with investing for income. And our guest speaker is going to spend some time talking about that. So can't wait for you to hear that. But a couple of announcements before we get to that point. First of all, I had a radio show for 5 years. I took a 1-year hiatus, and now we are doing the radio show again. So we are back on the radio, AM 870, KRLA, The Answer, 4:30 p.m. on Saturdays. And there's several ways for you to listen to that. Obviously, you can turn on AM 870 at 4:30 on Saturdays and listen to it that way. Or we started a podcast. And we talked about this at our last client appreciation event, something I was thinking about doing. And so we started it. We've been doing that now for about 3 months. I've been waiting for this to just kind of announce it out there. But so if you're a podcast listener, you can go to your favorite podcast player and just search the Providence Financial Retirement Podcast, Providence Financial Retirement Show. Click on it. We do the podcast twice a week. We do it Sundays and we do it Wednesdays. Sundays is a replay of Saturday's show in podcast format. So you can certainly just listen to the show on the podcast. And then Wednesday, we do a bonus session. So it allows me to get a little more in depth and drill down a little bit. And the nice thing about a podcast is we can talk about something specific. I can't do that so much on the radio. I've got to be a little more broad. But on the podcast, I can talk about specific. And if it's something relevant to you, great, you can listen to it. If not, you don't need to. So Providence Financial Retirement Podcast. And if you don't have a podcast player, you've never done that before, you can go to our podcast website, Providence Financial Podcast, and just listen to it right on your computer without even downloading anything. So that's important as well, too. Wanted to give you a quick update on my book. I feel like I've been talking about my book for years, the book that I've written, because I've probably been talking about my book for years. It is a book I started 2 or 2.5 years ago or so. I didn't realize how long it was going to take. And it was done in, I think, March or April of this year. And May came around, and I asked the publishers, I said, look, I can't have a book come out about finances in August. That was when it was supposed to come out. So I can't have a book about finances come out in August and not talk about COVID. So please, please, please let me write another chapter. Well, they did, and that's just delayed the publishing. So I've heard that it's going to come out in February. I'm not so sure if that's correct. It's going to be a big book. I believe there's 12 chapters in there. The book is called More Life Than Money: How to Not Outlive Your Retirement Savings. And yet each chapter is talking about something you don't know about retirement that could really wreak havoc or wreck your retirement. And so although it's a big book, each chapter stand alone. So kind of like the podcast, you can just read the chapters that are relevant to you and leave out the ones that aren't. But we all heard it said that, what you don't know can't hurt you. And we all know that that's not true. We know that what you don't know can absolutely kill you and wreck your retirement. And so that's going to be coming out in February. We'll certainly put notices out about that. And for you, for our valued guests that are here watching this webinar, every one of you are going to be entitled to get a copy of that book by going to Amazon.com and spending $24.95. So you are going to be entitled to get a copy of that book. So I'm really looking forward to having it in your possession. But I am going to ask you to buy it. I don't like to do things mediocre. You know that. We want to make this book a bestseller. I'm going to need your help to do that. So you'll hear about it. Please buy it. And not just buy it for me, but buy it because I want you to read those different chapters. And if there's something that we need to talk about that maybe we haven't talked about before, or you just want to bring, to the top of mind, then that's going to help you. But we don't want you to miss something just because you didn't realize that was something worth talking. So I'm going to want you to get the book, and you'll want to read it as well too. We also have a newsletter. You should be on our newsletter list. I hope every single one of you on here is a client. We send out that newsletter as necessary. And so if you don't get them from us, email us tomorrow, and we'll make sure that we get that newsletter to you, because I do put out valuable information on it. I also include a lot of times in the newsletter a YouTube video. And that's how I'm going to communicate with you as a group. If there's something that you guys need to know, I can't call 1,000 people in one day and tell you something. I'm going to put out a video. So please watch the videos. We have had several requests from you to try to keep the videos a little shorter. No one's ever accused me of being short-winded. So I'm going to try, but no promises. But I'm going to try, and I'm going to put some notes in there so you can kind of read the notes ahead of time for our future YouTubes, and then that way you'll know if it's something you watch that's relevant to you. But that's how I'm going to communicate with you if there's something that I think we need to make a change on globally, or something that's changed within the legal world, trust wills, or so on, or within the economic. So important to just pay attention to those YouTubes. I try not to put them out needlessly. And then lastly, the last of our announcements is Yelp. Because we're working at home and because people aren't comfortable getting together with other people, probably 9 out of 10 meetings I do today are virtual. Whereas prior to COVID, 10 out of 10 meetings were in person. I was pretty much doing everything in person. And so really, when we're taking on new clients, what it's done is it's opened up the world to us. So we've taken on more clients from out of state, from your referrals, and from other sources than we have, in the last 3 months, than we have ever in my entire career. So it's great that this whole virtual environment opened up the world to us. But it's harder to build rapport. It's harder to create a relationship. So your referrals are important, and Yelp is important. That's one of the more valuable ways that people go and do a little research on us. So if you'd be so kind as to go put something nice about us and rate us 5 stars on Yelp, then that would be phenomenal. We'd appreciate that. It's more valuable now than it ever has been. And if for some reason you can't rate us 5 stars, please scratch that idea and call me. I'd want to know about it. But I would like to think that every one of you could rate us 5 stars. But in all seriousness, if you couldn't for some reason, let us know. Let me know, because I want to deal with that. Otherwise, it just would be something that would be helpful. So before we introduce our guest speaker, I have to introduce you to our team. And this is my favorite meeting of the year, getting to talk with you guys. I don't get to see you guys now. It's not the same virtually here as it is being on stage, but I'm glad you guys all get to see me. So nothing like having hundreds of eyeballs staring at you and you can't see anybody. Of course, that's called TV. But I want to introduce you to my staff, and just very quickly, so you know. And normally I would bring them up on stage and make a big deal, but the reality is no one's ever gotten to the top alone. Whoever said it's lonely at the top wasn't a leader. And the reality is, without my staff, I wouldn't be anywhere. So the first person I want to introduce is the most important lady in my life. She's the most beautiful lady in my life, and that is my wife, Anka Sikaro. Anka is our social media coordinator. And she has a background in journalism, and she used to be a talk show host, and she used to be a news anchor and a reporter. So she's great at taking the information I give her, which oftentimes is in the legal jargon and hard to read, and making it in English. And so all the newsletters that we do, the Facebook, the LinkedIn, the tweets, all the social media is done by her. And it's great that we work along very well as we do, because if we didn't work together great, I'm not quite sure what I would do. So she's very helpful. Next on the list is Lorraine Grossman. Lorraine was our estate planning coordinator for 5 years. And during that 5 years, she always had it as a goal to become an advisor. So she was learning and training, and there's no one that spent more time learning. And she just got busy enough to where she couldn't do both. So she is an independent advisor affiliated with our firm. If you're a client of hers, you're in great hands. She and I are great friends. She's a great, great advisor. Next on the list is Jacqueline Thomas. Jacqueline is our newest member. She started off as our executive assistant, and then she got promoted into the client service position. And she's done just absolutely phenomenal. She got a great personality. So when you call in for any servicing issues, you're going to speak with her. And she's already been trained well, but what she doesn't know, she can certainly get that for her. So you'll be talking with her as you have servicing needs. And you'll probably be hearing from her as well, too. I'm often communicating with her and asking her to call you on my behalf to relay a message or schedule a meeting. So if you hear from Jacqueline, that's who she is, our client service manager. She's done a great addition to the team. Next on the list is Denise Frias. Denise is our marketing coordinator. She's responsible for all the in-person events that I do. We haven't done those since COVID started, but that's all been turned into webinars. So now I do webinars once a week. She's responsible for that. She's also single-handedly been responsible for all of our client appreciation events that we've done in the past, and including this webinar. And for you, you got a link and a couple of emails and, clicked on a button and here I am. But for her, it was days and days and hours of work behind the scenes. So she's done a great job just so I can get here and speak with you guys and we can all be on together. So thank you, Denise. And I know Denise is on now as well, too, kind of help coordinating as well, too. Next on the list is Jerry Alcala. Jerry's our client relationship manager. It's Jerry's job to talk with people that call our office that are interested in learning more or want to become a client. So it's his job to keep my calendar full. He does a great job of that, sometimes too good of a job, but he's phenomenal in bringing on clients and talking to them about our process. So Jerry's huge addition to our team. Not addition, it's been with us for, I think, 5 or 6 years at this point. Next on the list is Cherie Torres. Cherie is our estate planning coordinator and paralegal, and she handles the entire estate planning division. She's been with us now for, I think, 6 or 8 months, and she's got an extensive background in estate planning with several different law firms. She's been a great addition to the team. If you want to have your trust amended or updated or have a question, where do you find something, or you want deeds because you bought property, you want deeds recorded, she's the one that you're going to deal with as far as that's concerned. So any estate planning issues go through Cherie. Great member of the team. And lastly, but certainly not least, and you guys know her well, our office manager, Crystal Suter. She is also our new accounts manager. This is her 10th year. So if you've been a client of ours within the last 10 years, then you've all met her because she has helped you open your account so that we can start managing it. And as the office manager, she really runs the place when I'm not there. And I guess, truth be told, she actually runs the place when I'm there too. So that's probably the reality. So bottom line is, this is our team. If it wasn't for the team, we wouldn't be anywhere. I hope you feel a connection with the team members you've had a chance to interact with, and just thank them. We thank you for your business. Thank them as well too when you talk to them. And we certainly appreciate having you and them as well. So the time has come to introduce our guest speaker. David Scranton is a friend of mine for the last 10 or maybe even 10 or 12 years, maybe even 12 years at this point. I've known Dave for that time. We've worked together. We're very intertwined business-wise. He is the founder of Sound Income Strategies. And Sound Income Strategies is the firm that we use behind the scenes to manage your money. And so you're going to get a chance to hear from him. He's also the best-selling author of several books. The most recent book is The Retirement Income Story. And in The Retirement Income Story, he talks about the Retirement Income Store, which is a franchise concept that he started to get the message of income out there. And I'm sure he'll touch on that a little bit. But I'm convinced there's a whole wave of baby boomers that are going to get to their 80s and realize that they're not invested properly. And that's a story that's not being told. So he started the franchise concept. So we've got franchises all over the country that are getting the income story out there. And we are a retirement income store franchise. That's something we did within the last year. We sent a notice out to everyone about that as well, too. So he's the founder of the Retirement Income Store franchise. He's also the founder of Advisors Academy. This is a group of guys that train advisors nationwide, and I'm fortunate enough and blessed enough to sit on the board of directors of that and help guide this organization to train advisors nationwide about dealing with their clients, running practices, and so on. He is also host of the of the Income Generation TV show, which airs at 7 o'clock in the morning on NewsMax every Sunday morning. He's the host of that show. And for some of you on here, I know you are diligent watchers. For others of you, might not have known he had a show. Set an alarm for 6:45, grab a coffee, 7 o'clock a.m., find yourself there. And I'm sure he's going to talk a little bit about that as well, too. So without further ado, we're going to play a short video of my friend David Scranton, and then you're going to get a chance to listen to him. And as soon as he's done and finished answering your questions, then I am going to come back and say goodbye. And you're going to notice there's a Q&A tab. Click on the Q&A tab on the webinar, and you can type in your questions as you go. He'll get to them at the end. Thank you. We'll see you in probably 30 minutes or so, and let's roll the video.
Let's get started. Get ready to separate reality from myth.
With us, David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
But David Scranton says, hey, not so fast.
How does it affect the markets? How does it affect the economy? But now it's time to welcome back our good friend, Steve Forbes.
You may have money, you may have it saved away, but if you are uncertain about the future, you're going to clutch your cash.
Peter Marisi.
Everybody, even people who grow tomatoes, are blaming the steel tariff for their troubles. Well, it's absurd.
Jim Rogers.
We have trade deficits with a lot of countries, not just China.
John Nigerian.
So we were due for some volatility. Boy, did we get it in spades.
Joining me right now is Sound Income Strategies founder and CEO David Scranton. David, it's good to see you this morning.
I feel as though finally the Federal Reserve has listened to the president and they've started to side with the president. They were kind of working against him for a while, it seems.
And that rates are likely not going to go back to historical highs, right?
The momentum we have right now in the stock market's strong, and nobody knows how long it's going to last or when it might end. But things are feeling, to me, a little bit like 2007 again in the stock market.
And joining us now, market watcher Dave Scranton. I want to just get your thoughts on whether or not you agree with Hassett's forecast for next year.
I do not. I think growth next year is going to be much closer to 2%. And, you know, I think Hassett is just the latest of a bunch of government officials who's coming out trying to back Jerome Powell. The other thing is to keep the spread between short-term and long-term rates at about 2%, right. Not compress it. That means that the 10-year Treasury would have to be between 4 and 5%, which I don't see how that's going to happen at a time when there's quantitative easing abroad. Here in person with all of you in a traditional client appreciation event. And most importantly, I regret not getting to hear Anthony sing. I've missed that. So that's something I've got to put on my bucket list for the future. We have a lot to cover today and just so little time because, as you know, you don't need me to tell you that 2020 has been a crazy year in the financial markets. So we're going to talk about what happened, why, what the economy looks like potentially moving forward into 2021, how that affects the bond market, or what I like to refer to as the universe of bonds and bond-like instruments. Also, how that's likely to affect the stock market. Before we get into all that, though, I want to take a minute and just talk about this business model that Anthony and I have both adopted as really a specialty in our practices over the last for me, it's been more than 2 decades now. And for Anthony, certainly more than 1 decade with this particular specialty. And that is investing for income. You know, it's interesting. You get outside of Anthony's office or my office or any of the franchisees, and you hear very few people talking about investing for income, which is unfortunate because, you know, many of you watching this are baby boomers. And some of you who aren't baby boomers might be in the generation ahead of the baby boomers, which means if anything, you need income. You're retired or you're about to retire. So a lot of people talk about income, but a lot of advisors don't really know how to help you generate income the right way. And the reason for that is quite simple. Most advisors today got into the business in the 80s and 90s, the best stock market in U.S. history. And as such, they became really growth-oriented, where they thought about just the capital appreciation buying stocks, buying mutual funds, having them go up in value. And they stuck to their model. You know, it's interesting. You probably don't know a chiropractor that's become an orthopedic surgeon, nor do you know an orthopedic surgeon that's become a chiropractor. People typically get into their profession and they stay in their little niche. And the same is true with financial advisors. So one of the many reasons for which I have so much respect for Anthony is the fact that when we talked well over a decade ago about changing his business model to really becoming an income specialist, although already having a thriving career as a financial advisor, he did something that most advisors didn't do. And that is, he had the courage to change his business model because he knew that it was going to be in the best interest of you, his loyal clients. So I'm glad to be here today talking about this. And you know, it's interesting when you own a firm where the word income is in its middle name, such as Sound Income Strategies. You can imagine that now with interest rates at zero, it's made my life and Anthony's life a little bit more difficult, right? So I'm going to share with you today some of the things that we are doing to continue to be able to give you a very respectable income stream in the form of interest and dividends, in spite of what's happening with interest rates right now in our country. Of course, you know, the reason interest rates are down so far is because of what happened with COVID-19. Now, I will tell you this, we're already very possibly heading into a recession well before that. You know, we talk about low interest rates. It's kind of funny because in my newsletter back in May of 2008, now that was, I guess, 12 and a half years ago, we were in the middle of the financial crisis. The Fed lowered interest rates. And I remember making a bold prediction back then saying, I think interest rates are going to go to zero. And when that's no longer enough stimulus to get the economy going, the government is going to come in, the Federal Reserve is going to come in and invent newfangled, never done before type ways of stimulating the economy. And so they did. Interest rates went to zero. They started, you know, quantitative easing. They went through QE 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And also in that newsletter, I remember predicting that we were in a new norm of low interest rates, basically following the footprint of Japan, as you heard Anthony talk about in one of his interviews on TV just a few minutes ago. So, you know, the Fed kept rates low for a long time after 2008, and they started raising rates around 2016. And they raised in 2017, 2018, and finally in December of 2018, just 2 short years ago, the Fed wanted to raise rates one more time, and the bond market, and you probably don't know this, but the bond market basically had a tantrum, and they called it the taper tantrum, and the Fed had to stop raising rates. Then the following summer of 2019, look at the possibility of recession coming up at some point. The Fed actually started lowering interest rates. And it was at that time I personally felt vindicated with my prediction that I'd made back in 2008, that I do believe we are in a permanent environment of low interest rates. In fact, we might even see negative interest rates in our country coming up. Right now, the 10-year government bond is paying less than 1% interest, 0.9. So think about what that means. You're going to buy a 10-year government bond and get 0.9% interest per year and tie your money up for 10 years. If you're thinking that doesn't sound very attractive, then I'm with you. It's simply not. A lot of European countries, a third of the countries have gone negative interest rates, at least on some part of their bonds. And I wouldn't be surprised if at some point we get there also. In fact, President-elect Biden is now talking about having Janet Yellen back as Federal Reserve, as now not Federal Reserve Chairman, but head of the Treasury. And she was one Federal Reserve Chairman who actually came out and said that she doesn't think negative interest rates are a bad thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up going there. Okay, but why did it happen? Well, it happened because we were concerned at first about possibility of recession, so they started lowering interest rates, and then all of a sudden, bam! The end of February hits, and we have this COVID-19 crisis. We haven't had a pandemic in 100 years in our country. Nobody really knew what was going on, and in the first quarter of this year, we ended up having the GDP. GDP is gross domestic product. So it's a measure for our economy. Our economy shrunk in the first quarter by 4%. Most of that shrinkage came, of course, in the second half of March. So with that happening and being obvious that it was going to happen and being obvious that we had to shut down the economy intentionally, first time we ever really shut down the economy intentionally like that, the Fed said we have to lower interest rates. They lowered interest rates from 2% to 0 on short-term rates, what's called federal funds rates, like this. Okay. Then second quarter, the economy was down 33%. We had negative 33% GDP growth. Third quarter, we had positive GDP growth of 33%. So you might say, well, second and third quarter washed each other out. Well, no, remember the mathematics I'm sure Anthony has talked to you about many, many times, right? Just because you lose 33% and gain 33% doesn't mean you're back to even. You're still down 10%. Why? Think about it. If you have $1 and you lose 33%, you're down to 67 cents, right? If that 67 cents gets a 33% gain, you're only up to 90 cents, right? Think about it. If you have a calculator, put 0.67 and multiply it by 1.33. You're only back to 90 cents. You're still down 10%. Now, the good news is with projected gains in the economy for fourth quarter, they're projecting that we're only going to be down about 3% for the whole year 2020. Even better, the most recent projections, if they hold true, are that the economy in 2021 should grow at a rate of about 3 to 4%, which brings us back up really by the end of 2021 with where we were at the beginning of 2020. And that's great news. Okay. So where does this bring us with interest rates? Well, when everything hit in February and March, not only did the Fed lower interest rates to 0, but also at that point, they came in with another level of quantitative easing. $3 trillion of quantitative easing, more that was done during the entire financial crisis through several tranches of it. They initiated $3 trillion of quantitative easing with a snap of a finger, really in March. Now, quantitative easing, without getting into all the mechanics of it, is basically where they manipulate long-term interest rates downward. Because you see, the Federal Reserve sets short-term interest rates. So they can set short-term interest rates downward. But long-term interest rates are market-driven. So the only way they can lower long-term interest rates is by manipulating them. How do they do that? Through these quantitative easing programs. Okay? So at the same time as they did that, and they opened up a whole bunch of lending facilities to go ahead and make lending available to various institutions, municipalities, and so on that might need it to stay afloat, they went ahead also, Congress went ahead at the same time and offered programs through the augmented unemployment program, another $600 a week for people who are unemployed because of COVID, the PPP program to keep small businesses afloat, and so on. And between both of those programs, between what the Fed did and what Congress did, we saw one of the fastest stock market recoveries in history. The market had dropped by 38%, but recovered fully within just a few months, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. But first, interest rates. Okay. So interest rates dropped and they've stayed down. The markets come back, the economy looks stronger, but interest rates are still down. The Federal Reserve has actually come out and said, we're not going to raise rates for 4 years. Other officials of the Federal Reserve said it could be as much as 6. Okay? So we have to face the facts that we're going to be in this very low interest rate environment now for many, many years. So what are we doing at Sound Income Strategies to help you so that you can continue to get competitive interest and dividends on your investments? And what do we do during the bottom of this in March in order to make sure that you were protected? Well, in March, when things bottomed out, the most important thing we wanted to do is look at the balance sheets of all the companies that we own. You know, think about it. If you were to lose your job, when you were still working, the first thing you'd want to do is look at your savings account and say, okay, how long can we pay our bills? If we cut back our expenses, how long can we pay our bills off our savings? So that was something that was very important for us to do. So we went through over 100 different holdings, and we said, you know, we wanted to prove that each of these companies could make it a year with 0 income. So literally, if they had 0 income and couldn't cut down their expenses at all, we wanted to make sure they could make it 12 months. Of over 100 holdings, there were only 4 that we were concerned might not have that type of staying power. We liquidated those holdings because we wanted to protect you. In retrospect, we look at things right now, and if we hadn't liquidated those holdings, they would have been fine. But I wanted to be ultra conservative. Being a bond guy by nature, my job is to wear the belt and then to wear the suspenders in case the belt fails. And that's kind of sort of what we did by liquidating those 4 holdings. But we also know now, looking forward, that we and you are facing a headwind with interest rates. Some of the things in the portfolios could be maturing from time to time in this universe of bonds and bond-like instruments, and could be, as a result, could be tempted to renew at lower interest rates. So we do 4 major things that make us different from most others in this world of bonds and bond-like instruments. First of all, we buy individual bonds and bond-like instruments. Most advisors today, because they got in the business in the 80s and 90s, the best stock market in U.S. history, they don't really do that. They buy bond funds, bond ETFs. We do primarily individual bonds and bond-like instruments. And that's important because that gives you more assurity. That gives you, in most of the instruments, a fixed interest or dividend payment, and also some date in the future at which you'll be eligible to get your full par value or face value back. The second thing, and this is very important, is we don't just rely on the rating services. Most people, because they do bonds and bond-like instruments in our business kind of as an afterthought, they just rely on the rating services. We learned during the financial crisis that you can't rely on the rating services. So when our chief investment officer, Eric Lutton is our portfolio manager for bonds and bond-like instruments. When he does his work, he looks at the financials from the actual companies. And he finds that sometimes there are lower rated companies that are lower rated by the financial agencies where the financials actually look better than some higher rated companies. Let me give you an example. Let's say, we're going for a loan in the bank, and the bank had a cutoff, and they said, well, we're only going to make loans to people with FICO scores of over 700. And you went in there and you had a FICO score of 710. I had a FICO score of 690. You'd get the loan, I wouldn't get the loan. But yet, if the banker then took some time not to just have that hard and fast line to say, Mr. Scranton, tell us why your credit is at 690. And I explained that, unfortunately, we had a medical emergency in the family. My wife paid the bills. She was in the hospital, and she forgot to pay some credit cards, and then we caught up afterward. Well, with that type of rationality, that banker might turn around and look at my financials and say, wow, you got stronger financials than the other person with 710 credit rating. So looking at the financials is the second major thing that we do, because it allows us to get better interest rates many times for you, because we're not just looking at those that are highly rated by the rating agencies. We're looking beyond that. We're actually doing the work that financial advisors should do, but unfortunately, many financial advisors have just grown too lazy and haven't done it. The next thing we do is we don't just go and buy investments at the open market. We use limit orders, and we use online technology, a lot of Bloomberg technology, named after Michael Bloomberg, to be able to look and say, in the world of bonds and bond-like instruments, who is selling what? The interesting thing about bonds is they're negotiated. It's not like a stock or a mutual fund where if somebody paid $10.23 5 minutes ago for it, chances are you're going to get it for $10.23, give or take a little bit right now. In the world of bonds, they're negotiated. So just like real estate, you could have 2 houses that are very similar. One person might be willing to sell their house for $350,000, the other person may not. It's all based upon what they're willing to take. So you have to go out and put out bids and hope that those bids get taken. So by using the technology that we have, we can actually see who's selling what at what price, and we can go out and negotiate with the seller. Again, something that in the universe of bonds and bond-like instruments, most advisors just don't know to do because they're stock market-based advisors. All right. So that's a third thing that really makes us different, that Eric Lutton, our PM on the bonds and bond-like instrument side, does when looking at investments. And the last thing is active management. And we're actually stepping up our active management right now, because the best thing that we can do is climb the yield ladder. Sometimes there are 2 securities that are very similar. One could be paying 4.25, one might be paying 4.5. Well, if they're similar enough and we can make a swap from the 4.25 to 4.5, we can get you a little more yield. So even though yields might be coming down, we can combat that by trying to get you a little bit more. So again, Eric Lutton, our Chief Investment Officer, those are 4 things that he does as a portfolio manager for bonds and bond-like instruments to combat this world of low interest rates. Because what you saw in March in your portfolios, bonds and bond-like instruments, where you saw all the values drop, that was really unique. It was because what we had was what we call a black swan event. We had a pandemic. This wasn't just a bear market. Usually in a bear market, bonds and bond-like instruments don't react that way. But when you have a pandemic or black swan event, which is like a 100-year flood, people panic and they try to get cash. And when you're trying to get cash, they sell anything that basically isn't stapled down to the ground. So they'll sell their stocks. That's why the stock market dropped 38% in March. And then when all of a sudden stocks are down too far, they don't want to sell anymore, people then buy bonds. And when bonds go down, then they'll sell preferreds. And that's why you saw some of your portfolios drop a lot more than you might have expected. But you'll also notice that when the government came in through the Federal Reserve and then through Congress, things came back really, really quickly. Even some of you have a little bit of money in something called BDCs, business development companies. And some of those dropped more than anything else, in large part because BDCs are not owned by institutions like bonds and preferreds are. BDCs are owned by individuals, and individuals tend to panic quicker, when you have a black swan event, if you will, than institutions. So they sold off even faster. But even those have come back almost 100% now. Okay. So again, barring a black swan event, having just a normal garden variety recession, I don't personally envision that type of volatility moving forward in this universe of bonds and bond-like instruments. But the good news is that because you've been through this, you now have the confidence to know that your income really hasn't changed. Your income has stayed consistent. That's being generated from the investments. And because the investments have a par value, a face value, or because the investments inside there have a par value or face value, essentially they came back pretty quickly. Okay, so that's a little bit about the interest rates and the bonds and bond-like instruments and what we did to protect you in the spring and what we're doing moving forward to keep everything as competitive as we possibly can for you, even in light of my prediction and Anthony's prediction of us being the new Japan in terms of interest rates. So how about the stock market? I know Anthony's been talking to you about this, the possibility of having a third drop coming up. So the question a lot of you are wondering now is, was that third drop we had in March really the third drop in the stock market? I know Anthony and I have been talking about longer drops. This is a quick one. Heck, within 4 months, bam, we were right back again. Was that the third drop or was it not? Well, I believe it likely was. And I believe it likely was because all this influence between the Federal Reserve and what Congress did, I wish Congress would be a little quicker on the second tranche of aid for unemployed individuals. The news today seems to say finally they're coming closer to agreeing. So let's all pray after we get off this that Congress can get this done in the next week or so, because there are a lot of people that are out of work that really do need help. And frankly, the fact that Congress has been holding all of us as citizens hostage over the politics behind it is unfortunate. So hopefully that's going to end really, really soon. But because of the steps they had taken in the spring, I really do believe that was the third drop that we saw. So what does that mean in stocks? Some of you might be saying, okay, I'm willing to take a little risk. I'm willing to have some money in the stock market. But I don't want to give up my yield. I don't want to give up my income that I'm getting in bonds and bond-like instruments. Well, the reality of it is you don't have to. Because we're sound income strategies, all of our stock strategies are custom, but they're geared toward income. As much as 5% in dividends from dividend-paying stocks. So essentially, you have upside with the stock market. Of course, that means you have downside with the stock market. But also, you're getting a much more competitive dividend yield. Eric Bayrich, who is our portfolio manager for our stock portfolios. You can imagine how confusing it gets around here with two Erics running both sets of portfolios. But Eric Bayrich, when he manages these stocks, he manages, again, more value-oriented, dividend-oriented stocks. not growth and momentum stocks. And here's the important thing to understand. A lot of people think improperly that managing high dividend value-oriented stocks is much easier than growth stocks. All you have to do, as people think, is just buy a bunch of blue chip stocks, sit back and collect your dividends. Managing growth is much more difficult. Well, I'm here to tell you the opposite is true. See, because growth is really a word that means momentum. So when you're looking at momentum stocks, it's actually much easier. Anybody could take an Apple or an Amazon after a few up days, could turn around and buy the stock, could put in some stop losses to protect them on the downside, and could ride that stock up. Anybody can do that. But when you're buying value stocks, it's more difficult because what you're doing is you're buying stocks that are out of favor. The reason they pay such a high yield isn't because the dividend went up, it's because the price went down. So on a percentage basis, the dividend's higher. And sometimes when the price goes down and you think there's a good value, it could be a good value or it could be something that's cheap for a reason. So part of what Eric Bayrich does when he's looking at that is trying to determine what's really a good value versus what's cheap and might get cheaper. In other words, what stocks you might buy and the prices might drop even further. And in doing this, he doesn't just look at the financials like most financial advisors does as the PM for our stock portfolios. Wherever he stops is where he starts. He then begins, and he's got over 30 years in the industry just focusing on value-oriented high dividend stock portfolios with an incredible track record of beating the S&P 500 and getting a much higher dividend yield in the S&P 500. And what he's done is once he looks at all the financials that most advisors do and then stop, he then starts to interview a whole bunch of analysts to try to determine, is this really a good value or is what he calls a value trap? Is this something that's likely to go down in value even further? It's cheap for a reason because it's about to get cheaper, right? And when he gets both sides of the story, he then comes up with a list of questions. He calls the actual company that he wants to invest in, talks to investor relations, talks to some of the C-suite officers, and asks the hard questions and gets their answers. And based upon how they answer their questions, he then looks at this and decides, okay, is this really a value that's cheap and is likely to bounce back, where now I can get a good dividend yield but get some good upside for our investors? Or is this something that really is a value trap that's cheap and is about to get cheaper and have a loss for investors? And then and only then will we make the decision to pull the trigger. So here's the bottom line before we open up for questions. If you want to stay really conservative in the world of bonds and bond-like instruments, great. We've got your back and we're doing everything we can to fight that low interest rate headwind on your behalf. But if you say, you know what, I'm willing to take a little bit more risk and gee, getting close to a 5% dividend yield in stocks doesn't sound bad if I get some upside potential, then you're going to want to give Anthony a call and talk to him about some of the options there and how you can mix together both of those and still have a great income-based portfolio, some great downside protection, but also have perhaps a little more upside potential. Because the reality of it is this: when interest rates go down, stocks are worth more. So the fact that interest rates have come down, frankly, means that stocks are up for a reason. And that's why a lot of analysts are looking at 2021 as being a pretty good stock market year. How good? Nobody knows. But with interest rates down this low and the Fed being willing to print money like crazy to boost up the stock market, that's why we believe that was the third drop in the spring. And now introducing stocks, high dividend-based stocks in your portfolio is okay for those of you who have the right risk tolerance level. Again, give Anthony a call when if you feel like you fit into that category. Okay, Anthony was a little self-deprecating humor, which I love, by saying nobody's ever accused me of being short-winded, and I apologize. I think I just long-winded him by overstaying my welcome by 5 or 10 minutes. But questions. We do have some questions now being typed into the chat section, and I believe that. There's a question here. How much by percentage do you believe is worth putting towards stock investment in, from our portfolio at this time? That's a question best answered by Anthony as you review with him one-on-one. But generally speaking, I will tell you this. If you're trying, there's a lot of studies, and I can't get into it now because Anthony will, I know he's 3,000 miles away, but he will find a way to get a big cane, put it around my neck, and just pull me off the screen if I talk too long. But when you're trying to lower your volatility in a portfolio, the lower volatility point is considered to be about 30% stocks and about 70% bonds and bond-like instruments. So for anybody who wants to put some stocks in, you can get up to about 30% without increasing your risk. In theory, with actually decreasing your risk. Then if you get up over 30%, you might be increasing your risk again. So again, where you are in that spectrum really depends upon your own ability to withstand risk, which is not just personality and your ability to sleep at night, but it's also proximity to retirement and can you afford to get a dividend cut? Remember, most of the bonds and bond-like instruments have a consistent dividend or interest payment, whereas which the stock market, as we were reminded of again in March, sometimes the dividend yields on common stocks can get cut. Most companies, they go up over time, but if you can't afford for that dividend yield to get cut because you're retired, then you've got to be real careful on how much you put in the common stock category. Again, give Anthony a call, schedule a review with him, and because he knows you far better than me, he's best suited to help you with that. Okay. Let's see here. Hold on. We got okay. Question is, okay, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but if I put $1 million in the portfolio a year ago, and I'm supposed to get 5% per year in income and not taking it. If I get 5% per year, that means my portfolio should be up to, if I start with $1 million, should be up to $1,050,000. Why is my portfolio not quite at $1,050,000? Why is it at $1 million? Okay, so I can't answer that question specifically for you because I don't know your specific holdings, your specific makeup in your portfolio. But I will tell you this. When Anthony talks about you reinvesting the 5%, he talks about your income going up by 5%, which means that if you had $1 million generating $50,000 a year, right now, a year later, your income is probably going up to $52,500. It's a 5% increase on your income. The principal values are going to fluctuate. So if your principal value is still down a little bit, it's possible that even when you reinvested that $50,000 of income, you're still at the $1 million mark, give or take 10 or 20 or 30,000. But when you made that transition to go from a growth mindset to an income mindset, the good news is that by reinvesting it, your income went up by 5%. So that $50,000 being generated would have gone to $52,500. And that's the most important thing, because as you're approaching retirement, there's going to come a day where you're going to want to take that income, or you're going to have to take RMDs and you're going to have to take it. So you want to make that income number as big as you possibly can. And that's the big paradigm shift that sometimes it's hard for some of you to go through. In spite of having Anthony there as a resource constantly, because you've been trained by advisors your whole life that it's all about the amount of money you have in your account. And now you've realized by working with Anthony, it's not about how much money's in there, it's about how much income it can generate. So I understand why it's human nature to constantly go back and say, well, gee, I want that $1 million to grow. But at the end of the day, it's not about the $1 million growing, it's about that $50,000 of income growing because you reinvested. Okay? All right. If I have a mortgage, how much should my interest rate go down before I should refinance? Many loan companies are willing to lower my rate without extending the length of the loan. In part, it depends upon how long you're going to keep it and how many points you have to pay. If you pay in theory, if you don't pay any points up front on the refinance, any reduction in interest rate is going to help save you money. Even if you have 22 years left on a 30-year mortgage, you can refinance for 30 years. You can make a little bigger payment. You still get it paid off in 22 years and save money, even if it's a quarter point lower. But if you have to pay points, let's say you have to pay 2 points up front, 2%. Well, then you have to stay there long enough to get that back through the reduced interest rate. So for most people, the general feeling is about, as a general rule of thumb, although there is no rule of thumb, it really depends on your situation, usually about 1%. When you see interest rates come down by 1%, it's usually a point where people do want to refinance. If you're going to be in the house for a while, it might very well make sense because this is a great opportunity right now. And understand that just because the 10-year government bond is down below 1% doesn't mean that it's possible for it to stay there, but have mortgage rates go back up again. If all of a sudden the economy becomes questionable and bankers are afraid of defaults, mortgage rates will go up even though interest rates might stay low. So this really is a really good time because the markets are confident right now. Bankers are pretty confident, and interest rates are low. So I think that's it for questions here. Anthony, I want to give it back to you. I'm sure you want to say some final words, but before we do that, I just want to thank all of you for being here today, and I just wish I had the opportunity to meet all of you in person. Anthony?
Thank you for answering all these questions as well, too. So now we come to the point where we're going to talk about what you need to do to win one of 5 iPad minis. And we're going to wrap up with this. Will be less than 2 minutes. What you're going to do is when we are done with this webinar, do not click the X to exit out of it. You want to click the exit webinar, because once you click that exit webinar, it's going to take you to a survey that we're going to ask you to fill out. If you fill it out quickly, just yes, no, then it's probably going to take you 4 or 5 minutes. If you want to give us some feedback, then it might take you 15, 20 minutes to fill out. But I would ask you to take some time and fill this out. We've changed a lot of things in what we do and how we deal with things and how we interact with you based on the information that you give us. So this is something that's going to be just very helpful for us. You'll be directed there as soon as you exit this webinar, or as soon as I close the webinar, it'll take you right to that survey. Take a few minutes, fill it out. What we're going to do is if you can't do it now, you need to eat dinner, you don't have time, email Denise tomorrow. Her email is denise.guerrero@Providence Financial Inc. She will email you the link. You can do it over the weekend. And as long as you've completed your survey by 8:30 Monday morning, then we're going to enter you into the raffle, and we're going to draw 5 names from everybody that completed the survey, 5 names, and the 5 people that pop out are going to win a free iPad mini just for filling out the survey, and that's only available to the attendees that are on here. So your odds of winning are pretty good, but that's what we're going to ask you to do. So again, if you have time to fill out the survey now, 15, 20 minutes, please fill it out. If not, email Denise. The email address is denise.guerrero@providencefinancialinc.com. Email her. She'll send you the link. Just do it sometime over the weekend, and hopefully you'll win the iPad mini. But that's what we're going to ask you to do. And please give us your feedback. Give us your valuable feedback as well, too. We find extreme value in that. So, and that's it. So again, I want to just thank you so much for being a client. Thank you for your trust. I hope you found value in David and his speaking. Give us feedback about that. It's on the survey that you're going to get. It's a pleasure knowing you guys. It's a pleasure working with each and every one of you. And oh, one more thing on the survey, the first page, you got to put your name and email address. And I think it might ask for your number. But that's how we're going to use the to put you into the raffle. So make sure you put your information, correct information there. But with that, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I look forward to doing this again live next year and seeing you in person and introducing my staff in person. Please, if you have any questions about anything Dave said, you want to talk about your portfolios, do a review. My door is always open, or anything else you want to talk about. But truly appreciate having you as a client. And I'm going to wish all of you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year's. Thank you so much. God bless. I hope you enjoyed.